Welcome to The Pulse, where we focus on all things people, power, and politics. I'm Roop Raj. We have a lot to get to tonight. There's more pushback over President Trump's deployment of the National Guard. A judge sides with the state of Illinois and orders the National Guard to stand down in Chicago. Also ahead, while a federal government shutdown drags on, our state has reached a deal. Troy Mayor Ethan Baker worked for former President Ronald Reagan and has a unique perspective about how diplomacy seems to be a thing of the past, at least for now. What can be done to change that? But we begin with the latest developments out of the Middle East. President Trump plans to head to the region, speaking to the Israeli parliament and attending a signing ceremony in Egypt. It comes after Israel and Hamas agreed to the first phase of a U.S.-led peace plan. President Trump says he expects all hostages to be returned Monday or Tuesday. As part of the deal, Israeli troops will pull back, beginning a ceasefire, while hostages go home. News of the deal has led to celebration on both sides of the coin in different parts of the Middle East. As you see over here, even American flags, people cheering on the streets of Tel Aviv and the central Gaza Strip. It's the biggest breakthrough so far since the war broke out 2 years ago, leaving tens of thousands of people dead, most of those Palestinians. Earlier today, President Trump speaking at the White House during this cabinet meeting, the president applauding all nations involved to bring peace to that region.
You know, last night we reached a momentous breakthrough in the Middle East, something that people said was never going to be done. We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace. They've all come together, something which is amazing, actually. They've all come together for this, and they're really probably the best relationships they've ever had. So it's been really something incredible that nobody thought it was possible to get it done. And very importantly, the hostages are coming back.
Former President Barack Obama also weighing in on the peace plan. He posted this on X. After 2 years of unimaginable loss and suffering for Israeli families and the people of Gaza, we should all be encouraged and relieved that an end to the conflict is within sight, that those hostages still being held will be reunited with their families, and that vital aid can start reaching those inside Gaza whose lives have been shattered. He goes on to say, more than that, though, it now falls on Israelis and Palestinians, with the support of the U.S. and the entire world community, to begin the hard task of rebuilding Gaza and to commit to a process that, by recognizing the common humanity and basic rights of both peoples, can achieve a lasting peace. The word lasting is critically important here. There are still questions, but both sides appear the closest that they've been in months to ending this devastating conflict. Joining us now to talk about this is Dr. Peter Trumbore, professor and chair of the political science department over at Oakland University. And it's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us here on The Pulse.
Thanks for having me back.
All right, so here we go. Look, when you look at this, and I've looked at pieces and parts of it, as I'm sure many of you at home have, this is a man who studies this stuff. When you look at this is the first phase. The first phase is kind of the best parts. The hostages get released, the bodies of those who didn't live get returned, aid starts flowing in, and the Israeli military pulls back. Am I missing anything in that first phase?
No, the first phase, in a lot of ways, is the easiest phase, right? These are the things that they could agree on now. There are much thornier issues that are part of this 20-point peace plan that the Trump administration has put forward that are going to be far harder to reconcile. And that includes a permanent or a complete withdrawal of Israeli military forces from Gaza, the question of whether or not Hamas will disarm, the question of what future role, if any, Hamas will have in Gaza, how Gaza is to be governed. All of that stuff is sort of pushed later on in the process. But this is a very hopeful sign, right? A ceasefire after 2 years is really significant, assuming that it lasts.
We keep saying lasting peace, and obviously President Trump even used that language today at his cabinet meeting, that the hope for lasting peace is something that we're seeing here. When you hear that, is it the phase two? There's 20 points to the plan. So this is phase one, phase 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We're also talking about who ultimately governs.
Right.
When we hear things like President Trump in the U.S. and Tony Blair in Great Britain will essentially help govern, is there something missing in terms of our international outlook, in terms of how that could look or work?
Well, I think that's going to be one of the most problematic points.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to accept the idea that Hamas is simply going to bow out and disappear. Now, there is a divide between Hamas's political and military leaderships. The political leadership is outside of the country. The military leadership is in Gaza. They can still call on thousands of fighters. Hamas has been far from destroyed. And
who's calling the shots, though? Is it the folks with the guns, or is it the folks on the political side?
On the day-to-day conflict, it's the folks with the guns. It's the military leadership of Hamas in Gaza. And there's certainly elements within the Israeli government that do not want to see a peace until Hamas is completely destroyed. And that is an almost insurmountable obstacle, right? It's very, very difficult to eliminate an organization like Hamas. And we see this from the history of countries dealing with political violent movements like Hamas, and especially national liberation movements. Because as long as the national aspirations of the community that Hamas claims to represent, as long as those aspirations are denied, you're going to have subsequent generations of people who will be willing to take up arms in the name of that struggle. We've seen this historically everywhere from Ireland to Gaza.
But does phase one weaken Hamas and their current fervor that they have about how they would like things to be?
I don't think so. I don't think it weakens Hamas. Hamas's big bargaining chip has been the hostages and the bodies of those the hostages that have died since 2023, right? That's their big bargaining chip. So giving that up makes them vulnerable. And they say that they have gotten a guarantee from the United States that if they release the 20 living hostages and then somehow turn over the other 28, I think, bodies of other hostages, that if they do that, if they follow through on that commitment, they say they have a commitment from the United States that Israel will not resume the war.
Sure.
I have no idea how ironclad that commitment is.
We'll have to have you back to talk about that, but I want to end on this question that I have for you. I find our American society to be in this position to only say either or and not hold two truths together. In other words, it's true that some of the domestic policies, many of them that President Trump is pushing onto the American people, are being met with fists, and rightfully so, and being met with federal courts and attorneys general. But it's also true that this peace deal is good news, and it is something that we can all celebrate together as Americans. As a political science professor, do you find that Americans have a hard time digesting two truths at the same time?
Of course, right. I think it's absolutely consistent to say that if Donald Trump has succeeded on this particular issue, that is something we should all celebrate. That's not to then say, and therefore he gets a blank check to do whatever he wants in domestic policy. So yeah, I think it's possible, and I think it's our obligation to bring a critical eye to all of these things and all of the practices and policies and outcomes of this administration. Some we're going to agree with, and some I think we're going to justifiably stand up and try to resist.
And we're going to be talking about that in our next segment with Dr. Wendell Anthony, because there are so many things happening here at home that are meeting the objection of people who are scared and they would like some answers. And when it comes to this international front, this is encouraging news and good news, and credit goes to everyone who was involved in brokering this, including, by the way, Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey. But this is an interesting deal. Dr. Trumbore, good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Come back on the Pulse again sometime soon. As the ceasefire talks do continue, an attorney from Metro Detroit is being held by Israeli forces after she was detained while trying to help people in Gaza. We're talking about Huwaida Uraf, was part of the Freedom of Flotilla coalition aimed to end the blockade on Gaza when her ship was seized on Wednesday. Uraf is a mom and a Palestinian and was one of about 90 people on board of this. Many of them seen in this now viral video talking about being detained. Uraf's husband says this is the second time she's been on a flotilla that's been seized.
It's something that's part of who she is and her work, and she honestly couldn't live with herself if she wasn't trying to do something about this genocide that's happening to her people. And, you know, we as her family support her.
Activists call it an illegal abduction, but Israel calls it security. Others who are part of the flotilla include doctors, at least one member of the European Parliament, and several national lawmakers from Turkey, Denmark, France, and Belgium.
On this vote, the yeas are 54, the nays are 45, 3/5 of the Senate duly chosen and sworn, having not voted in the affirmative, means the motion is not agreed to.
Also tonight, for the seventh time, the Senate fails to pass a GOP funding bill to end the government shutdown. The procedural vote needed 60 votes to pass, but only got 54. Senator Rand Paul, the sole Republican, with the no vote. The government remains shut down at this hour with no clear path for how Congress will end this. So far, Republicans have held firm they will only negotiate with Democrats' demands after they reopen the government. Also tonight, New York Attorney General Letitia James has been charged as part of a mortgage fraud investigation. James was a foe of President Trump, suing him and his company for fraud in a case that played out while President Trump was running for office when he was candidate Trump. James is accused of bank fraud and making false statements to a financial institution. It is the latest political rival of President Trump to be prosecuted by the Department of Justice. Up next, a major ruling on the National Guard's deployment to Chicago. A judge says President Trump, not so fast. Dr. Wendell Anthony, the head of the NAACP, is in Studio C with the concerns he has about the power people still have. When we come back. Welcome back to The Pulse, where we focus on all things people, power, and politics. And when it comes to National Guards in cities, all of those are deeply affected. Joining us now in Studio C, Dr. Reverend Wendell Anthony of the NAACP. And Dr. Anthony, it's always good to see you. Thanks for joining us here.
Thanks for having me.
You know, these are important voices that we have to hear and are important to hear. And we often on this show will bring 2 or 3 people on to talk in a panel, but I think it's critically important on days as we have with Republicans and with Democrats to bring in one voice and chat for a moment. You wrote an op-ed that I think is really powerful, and you basically said, look, only people can save America from itself. And you went on to say civil rights leaders have to do their part, politicians have to pass legislation, activists have to sing, artists have to sing, write, speak for it, teachers have to instruct the importance of it, business leaders, corporations. Only people can save America from itself.
Right.
You want power to the people. This show's about people, power, and politics.
Absolutely.
How does that work for you in your mind?
It does, Roop. For the first time in 249 years, the United States has been placed on an international watch list for violations of civil rights, violations of attacking the media, closing down institutions, et cetera. That is something we never thought we would see. The fact that you have troops and going into Chicago, going into Washington, D.C., going into L.A., when the governors and the mayors have not asked for them, when crime is down in those particular locations and crime is up from the White House by virtue of breaking the law and ignoring the Constitution. So it's a very critical time. They may be in Chicago today, but they may be in Detroit tomorrow. And so we must be prepared to deal with all of that.
Dr. Anthony, I do want to ask you about the crime situation, because oftentimes political scientists will talk about this past election. It was often Democrats, when VP Harris was running, that said the border isn't an issue, crime isn't a problem, your pocketbook is fine.
Right.
It's not admitting that there's a problem.
Well, I hear
Would you
that.
say that crime is an issue in major cities in America, and we need to do something about it?
It's an issue everywhere. Where are these mass shootings occurring? So I'm simply saying that it's not an either or, it's both and. And the fact that we are not supposed, people are not saying there's no crime, but they're saying there's a way in the process to deal with it. You have local police, you have the FBI. Those are the people that deal with crime. When you bring in the federal troops, that's a whole different ballgame. And then, are you doing something that's constitutionally correct? Many of us believe that this is a pretext for the creation and the implementation of the 1807 Insurrection Act. It's a pretext for martial law, to the degree that it gives the president the power to do whatever he wants to do, to quell dissent, to stop public meetings, and to come in the community.
But
so
in Chicago, they stopped it today.
Yes.
We know that the federal judges basically said not so fast.
Right on.
And your thoughts about the guardrails in our country, are they holding strong in your eyes?
The federal, thanks God for the federal courts, because they are holding strong. As you know, he's attacking the judges, he's attacking prosecutors. He just had Letitia James indicted in New York. He's looking at Fannie Willis in Atlanta. He's just indicted James Comey. Where does this stop? We have never been here at a time like this. Isn't it something that the guy who is talking about instituting the Insurrection Act led an insurrection on January the 6th? And he's talking about 34 felonies that he has, and yet he is calling the shots. So we're simply saying that there's a better way to do this.
And we know that in kind of looking at that whole case, he stood by as an insurrection happened, but perhaps those who are defenders of President Trump, he didn't necessarily make it happen. But the bottom line is, where was he when that was happening?
He was sitting at the desk, and he pardoned 1,600 people who did go in there.
I want to ask you a little bit about what people can do. When you talk a little bit about people can save America from itself, Republicans, Democrats, everyone in between, those who want the power back, what can they do?
We can come together. We can agree on certain things. I think all of us want to follow the Constitution. I think all of us want to adhere to laws and to respect that. I think we should come to community meetings. We should get organized. If you're not a part of an organization, join an organization. Contact your political leaders, your congresspeople, your senators, and the folk that are in the House. Let them know what you think. Don't sit by, stand up. Everybody got to get in this game.
I think it's really interesting because you mentioned, okay, if you have a problem, you admit the problem, but you got to figure out a solution that works. Now, in this case, in Detroit, I find this to be a fascinating place for millions of reasons. But in Detroit, there's a U.S. attorney that was a Trump appointee, Grogan, who is working to break up gangs and youth violence by doing it through the federal prosecutors.
Right.
That's a model for the country, yes?
Yes. And he has meetings with local people to try to make them aware and connect with them. We're still saying there's a way to do this, Roop. We don't have to have federal troops in our cities on Woodward, on Living, or on 9 Mile. We can do better than that. And when the people come together, the people can solve this. The power of the people is much greater than the people in power, lest we forget.
And I would argue that there are politicians at our local level that have to kind of offer an olive branch at some level and try to work with this White House. Governor Gretchen Whitmer's done it, Mayor Duggan has done it, and so have so many others in the faith-based community.
Right.
So let's see how this goes. Dr. Wendell Anthony,
thank you.
Come back and talk to us again. Thank you for your time. Governor Whitmer is signing Michigan's bipartisan budget this week. Coming up, we're hearing more from the mayor of Troy about how civility played a role there and how perhaps folks in D.C. can learn from what happened here at home. You're watching The Pulse on Fox 2. Welcome back to The Pulse, Detroit's only nightly political talk show, and this subject affects all of us. The federal government shutdown continuing as a deal still hasn't been reached with lawmakers. Here in Michigan, our state budget was signed this week. Joining us now to talk about diplomacy, is it dead? Troy Mayor Ethan Baker, he's a Republican. We mentioned on this show that we have, Dr. Wendell Anthony, 101. We have this Republican 101, but he is a nonpartisan mayor. So in the role of mayor of Troy, you're nonpartisan, and you work very well with both Democrats and Republicans. But in this case, we kind of want to glean a little bit of your Republican perspective when we see what happened here. Speaker Matt Hall, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, I've spoken with both of them in the last 3 days, 4 days. They're thrilled that they can kind of boast that they worked well together. Is it because of the contrast that we're seeing in D.C. that they're able to kind of brag about this and feel a little more proud about it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's definitely, it makes it really easy to work together when things are so crazy in D.C., and I think that's part of it. So even if you're just a little less crazy, it feels like you're doing something really great and civil. But I will say this, I think Governor Whitmer and Speaker Hall, and they really did work together on this. They gave themselves that extra week to make sure things got done with the deal, and they managed to make it work. Legislators were up all night. I was in contact with my state representatives and state senators here in Troy, and they were working through the night trying to make sure everything was well taken care of. And in the end, they came together with a bipartisan deal that I read Governor Whitmer's press release. It's got Speaker Hall quotes. It's got, Republicans, Democrats. They seem to be on the same page and singing from the same hymn book. And that's refreshing as a Michigander.
It really is. Now, you worked for President Reagan after he left his presidency for a number of years, got to know President Reagan and Nancy Reagan really well. One thing I really respect out of President Reagan, one of many things, is he didn't see eye to eye with Speaker Tip O'Neill at the time. In fact, they were diametrically opposed politically. But they worked together. And then you have like Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich. They did not get along when it came to policy. But yet, he was in the middle of this trial, the impeachment trial, and Newt Gingrich shows up at the White House and says, "Merry Christmas, Mr. President. I'm sorry that we have to do this impeachment thing." He said, "Let's not talk about that." And they carry on. Are those days gone?
Well, I hope not, because if they are, people like me are in trouble, and we got to get a new line of work. But the reality is, I don't think they are. I think they're definitely different. Things evolve. We look at things differently now, very much in this country because of technology. I think we're inundated with flashy, headlines coming across our phones all the time. People are really focused on the sound bites, and it's doing a lot of damage to us. We've talked about this before, but I think at the core of it, we're all still human beings that care about one another, and we want to have good relationships with people. And there are leaders throughout this entire country that do value those relationships and will still work at it. But there are things that have to change a little bit. I mean, I did work for President and Mrs. Reagan, and I learned a lot about the president's time in office and studied a lot all the people he worked with. And the issue that I always found most fascinating is President Reagan was the biggest celebrity at the time to get elected president, being a former actor, and that was kind of what he was known as. But now our politicians, it seems like they're playing more to be the celebrity and less someone who's going to get things done, whether it's in Washington or even Lansing. And that's the problem. We got to focus less on making these American idols, essentially, and making them more the people that we've elected to do the good work that we need to keep our government running.
And the political theater that you see even in the hallways of the Capitol, they had yesterday 2 politicians who I won't even name, but they're good people trying to work hard on this bill, one Republican, one Democrat. And there's a crush of cameras in the middle of a hallway, and they're screaming at each other, waving the bill in each other's face. Right. Who benefits from that?
Well, nobody does. And maybe some fundraisers do.
Yeah.
Those certainly people, the media, I hate to bash on you, but media gets clicks for that kind of thing. But I think that the really interesting thing for that is we the people are the problem in that respect, because we're loving it. We're lapping it up. We're looking for more of it. We're sharing it with our friends. We're so stuck in our bubbles, and our feeds are full of things that either that we completely agree with and we're all for on the same team, or we're diametrically opposed to. So there's no opportunity to see both sides of an issue anymore, or see both sides or two sides of a person.
And
it's about people.
As you talk about blame that the media shoulders, the blame, as you say, also is shouldered by people who are engaging in social media algorithms that feed more negativity. If you start looking up puppies, you'll get more puppy videos. You're looking up how much you hate one politician, you're going to get more of that. Right. So the responsibility is on all of us to say, wait a minute here, what's true and what's not? Do you think people have a healthy diet of real information, or is it, in your mind, what you see, mostly social media?
No, I don't think people have that healthy relationship or that healthy diet. It's a problem, and people are seeing so much fake news, and I don't mean from media like it gets used. I mean fake news in their social media feeds. Yeah. And some people even recognize that it's fake, but the problem is it still went through their mind when they're scrolling through, and so a couple weeks later, they may not remember that they knew that was fake, but they're going to remember a headline that gives them misinformation. It's an issue, and we have to do something about it. I'm all for the First Amendment and free speech, and that's what this country is all about, but we have to find a way to make sure our population is properly educated and really understand the issues that are facing us, and stop idolizing our politicians and giving them reason to be even crazier and even louder.
And deifying them to the point where they can do no wrong. I often find it very fascinating when someone posted something about Hakeem Jeffries and everyone, how dare you talk about him? Someone posted about President Trump yesterday as well, and someone said, how dare you talk about him? These are not demigods. These are not kings and queens. Last question. There's a piece of legislation that was shot down again. Republicans said, hey, if we can't come to an agreement right now, let's do a standalone piece of this that says let's pay for our troops, pay for our TSA agents, pay for our border agents. Democrats voted that down. At some point here, this game of political football is hurting American people on the other side of that camera.
It's already hurting the American people, right? And we just don't feel the effects of it yet. I mean, maybe somebody flying is starting to feel that.
Or those workers.
Or the workers who aren't going to get paid on the 15th, when it's the first check they're missing. There's going to be a breaking point. I'm hoping we're getting closer to it. Obviously, listen, the principles on each side of the argument, I get where everybody's coming from, but they're elected to do a job, and that is to provide a budget and to make sure the government is run effectively and efficiently, and they're failing in that right now. And the blame can be on both sides. As much as that's going to hurt some people to hear, it is a both sides issue, because at some point, you've got to do what's right for the American people. You've got to do what's right as a government leader. Stop being an advocate and start being more of someone who governs. It's really tough. The both side in this blame game is I get that people don't like it, but in this case, you have Democrats and Republicans who are being pretty stubborn and petulant at that at best. All right. You know what? We appreciate you coming on the show today. Mayor Ethan Baker with Troy. Good to see you. Thank you so much for your time. That is the Pulse for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I'm Roop Raj. As always, it was good to be with you.